So, on to the webinar. Before I introduce today's presenters, though, I'd like to say just a bit about what ALA is hoping to achieve with this series. Libraries of all types have been active in the work of community engagement for years, and much of the conversation in recent years has been about the difference between outreach and engagement. Perhaps you've checked out some of the earlier webinars in this initiative. They've been geared at addressing these questions and focused on libraries serving larger and urban communities and academic libraries. But we've also found that library staff serving all types of communities have been checking out these resources and benefiting from the community engagement models they introduce. So for those of you who are new to this work or wondering what might best fit your community's needs, we really encourage you to check out the wealth of resources from this initiative. So the learning stream that we're debuting today is designed to introduce and teach techniques and best practices for dialogue and deliberation for libraries and library workers serving mid-sized, smaller, and rural communities. And the image you see on screen right now lays out the learning schedule for this series. And while there are many similarities between the work of library professionals in mid-sized, smaller, and rural communities and the work done in larger and urban communities, we have observed that there are significant differences as well. Librarians serving smaller communities sometimes wear many more job function hats. They have less opportunity for specialization, face different budgeting challenges, and deal with different dynamics of accountability. In smaller communities, there's sometimes no difference between the community you serve and your home community. But we've also heard that in mid-sized, small, and rural communities, there can exist a great deal of agility and opportunity for dialogue and change. So what we've been hearing from the field, and I hope some of what I'm saying resonates with you all, is that though engagement looks a bit different than outreach, and fundamental to engagement is the ability to foster dialogue and enhance outreach. Our hope is that you'll leave today's intro webinar to this work thinking about your role and your institution's role in engaging your community. And again, please do not hesitate to ask questions via the chat box as we go during the next hour or so, especially if this work is a bit new to you or if the terms we're using are unfamiliar. We will have time for all of your questions throughout the webinar and toward the end of the webinar. So in addition to the upcoming webinars in this series, for those of you who wish to try out and dig deeper with dialogue techniques for community engagement, we are hosting a free in-person pre-conference workshop at the ALA 2018 annual conference. You see that in the pink box on the right in this slide. Seats are going fast. We have capacity for about 50 people. And thanks to IMLS funding, there's an opportunity for small and rural library workers to apply for an $800 travel stipend to defray travel costs. Those applications are due by March 9th, and recipients will be notified by March 26th. And at the end of the webinar, I will be able to say a bit more of that, about that. And now it's my pleasure to stop talking, but introduce today's presenters. The National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation's founding director, Sandy Heyerbacher, and managing director, Courtney Breeze, and Diane Connery, the director of the Foxborough, Texas Public Library. Courtney Breeze is the managing director of the National Coalition of Dialogue and Deliberation, has been a wonderful thinking partner in this initiative. In addition to directing NCDD's ongoing programming, its many projects, and its biennial national conferences, she's a trained dialogue and deliberation facilitator, trainer, and mediator with extensive experience in the National Issues Forum framework. Courtney has also worked with the Massachusetts Office of Public Collaboration, Training, and Managing Mediation Programs. Sandy Heyerbacher is the founding director of NCDD, our lead partner in this initiative. Sandy led the creation of this national nonprofit network. Since 2002, NCDD has served as a hub, a resource clearinghouse, a convener, and a facilitative leader for this growing community of practice. Sandy has an MA in Intercultural and International Management from SIT Graduate Institute and a BA in Cultural Anthropology from Kutztown University of Pennsylvania. She is also a research deputy from the Kettering Foundation and serves on the advisory board of the Participatory Budgeting Project and the board of the National Issues Forum Institute, and has consulted for such organizations as the Corporation for National Service and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And Diane Connery is the director of the Foxborough, Texas Area Public Library, which, under her leadership, was named a Best Small Library in America 2017 finalist by Library Journal. Before moving to this rural community 8 years ago, Diane was a corporate trainer and entrepreneur. On the verge of closing its doors, Foxborough was saved by a group of dedicated volunteers, including Diane, who got involved and transformed it into the vibrant community gathering place it is today. And even though she doesn't have a green thumb in the garden, Diane tells us she enjoys planting seeds in the community. What a great sentiment to start today's session with. So thank you all for spending time with us today, and I'm going to pass the mic now over and we'll get going. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mary, and welcome everyone. It's great to be talking with you all today. My name is Courtney Brace. I am NCDD's Managing Director. So today we are kicking off this webinar series for public libraries serving small, mid-sized, or rural communities with an introduction to dialogue and deliberation. So this is meant to be a primer for you as you begin to explore the ways in which you can use dialogue and deliberation to engage your community in conversations that matter. So I just want to start us off briefly by reviewing our agenda for today. So today we're going to be talking about a whole bunch of things, but it really boils down to this. We'll be talking a bit about what we mean by engagement and how libraries are engaging, and I appreciate Mary for giving us a little bit of a primer on that already. We'll talk about dialogue and deliberation and how libraries can use them. We'll share some stories with you of dialogue and deliberation in libraries, and we'll talk about elements for success in doing this work. We'll, of course, introduce you to Conversation Cafe and Future Search. Those are our partners in this webinar series, and you'll be learning more extensively about them in the subsequent webinars. And then, of course, we'll share some additional resources with you and answer your questions. So to get us started with just a little introduction to who we are as an organization, I'm going to have Sandy talk to you about NCDD.
Hi, everybody. This is Sandy Heyerbacher, NCDD's founding director. So we started NCDD back in 2002 because it seemed like there was no infrastructure at that time that was connecting people who do dialogue and deliberation work. So we ran a conference for folks, and they were very excited to keep meeting and to keep in contact with each other. So NCDD has ended up growing quite a bit since 2002. We provide things like a very robust resource center on our website that actually has over 3,000 resources on there, including lots of issue guides, lots of descriptions of models, lots of books that you can read, and videos that you can use to inspire dialogue and all kinds of things like that. So hopefully you'd be interested in perhaps utilizing that resource center. We also run conferences every 2 years, national conferences, and there's one coming up in November in Denver, and we're very excited about that. And we run a lot of online events. We have these monthly confab calls and Tech Tuesdays that introduce people to projects in the field that are very exciting and that other people can learn from or get involved in, and that introduce people to different forms of online technology for engagement. Those are actually open to everyone, so you could actually participate in those. But we are thrilled to be working with ALA to introduce libraries to models for engagement in their communities and to help you bring your community together in conversations on matters of importance. This partnership means a lot to us, and we're thrilled to be doing this. So we also wanted to show you our map of members. We have a couple thousand people on this map, members in almost every state, and they basically use a variety of different methods, models for engagement, and work in various sectors: higher education, government, Many work as independent consultants and facilitators, and many work in nonprofit organizations. Some of our members are also librarians, and we would welcome you to become a member if you are interested. But this map in particular is a fantastic resource because you can click on it and find people in your area, hopefully, and be in contact with them, because our members are very generous with their knowledge and very excited about seeing dialogue and deliberation happen in new places. So they would be very open to hear from you. But yeah, back to you, Courtney. That was just a little intro to NCDD.
Awesome. Thanks, Sandy. That was great. And so now that you know a little bit more about us, we want to talk a little bit with you about public libraries and the work that you are doing today. So first, as you should be seeing now on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a poll that has just popped up. And so we want to ask you to take a moment to think about this question here. As you think about your community and your library, we're curious to hear what type of engagement would best suit your needs right now. And so we've outlined 4 options to respond to the poll. And as you can see, those are exploration, so engagement that's all about increasing understanding. Conflict transformation, that's really about addressing conflicts in your community. Decision-making, making decisions together, and collaborative action, which is really about taking action together. So we encourage you to take a moment and select the response that you feel would best suit your library and community right now. And there's no right or wrong answer here. We'll talk about this a little bit later on, and if some of these options feel a little bit unsure or confusing to you, we'll talk a little bit more about what we mean by these in a little while as well. So we'll just give you another few moments to fill out that poll. And again, we'll go back to it in a little while. So there's a second question here on this slide that you're viewing currently, and it's one that we asked you in the pre-webinar survey. We asked, so those of you who filled it out shared with us some of your current approaches to addressing your community's needs. And I would certainly welcome you, if you've finished filling out the poll, to feel free to share again so that everyone can see some of the approaches that you're currently taking by entering those in the chat box. So tell us a little bit about some of your current approaches to addressing your community's needs, and we can talk a bit more about that. And in the meantime, I can note certainly a couple of common approaches that we noted from looking at your responses that you've already shared with us. Folks, and thank you, Pamela, for hopping in, because that was the first thing I was going to mention. You have certainly talked to us about surveys. Yes, SurveyMonkey and other types of online survey formats. You certainly mentioned a lot about outreach that you're doing, both with schools, to seniors, to the homebound. You've mentioned community groups, participating in community groups and attending meetings in your community, working with other community partners. That's perfect. You guys are exactly hitting on the things that we had noted. And just generally being responsive to the needs that are being expressed by your community. I see, oh great, someone just responded here that they're holding a series of community conversations. That is fantastic. You also, of course, and I've seen several of you mention that you provide meeting space and programming that's important to the communities as well. And that is great, yes. Oh, wonderful. And I see some of you are actually diving into some of these dialogue and deliberation projects already, which is so great to hear. That's really wonderful. And if you haven't yet, that's fine. That's why you're here today, and that's what we'll be talking about. So that's great. I do want to note some of you had responded in the survey that there hasn't been necessarily a strategy for addressing community needs, or that this is a new priority for your library. And so I want to encourage you to think about the possibilities as you hear today's session and you hear more from your peers and so on, I imagine that some of these approaches that people are mentioning now in the chat might resonate with you. You might just not have identified that as strategies for engagement. So thank you all for sharing in the chat, and I look forward to looking at those a little more in depth myself later on, because you are giving us a lot of great info. But the point that I really want to bring home here is that libraries are already doing great work to learn more about what the community members would like to see at the library. Through Libraries Transform Communities Models for Change, we want to provide you with skills and methods for helping your communities express their needs and desires, and for helping them to explore options for how to address issues, make decisions, and take actions together. So our goal is to support and strengthen the foundations that you've built in your communities already, and therefore help you to both bring your community into the library, which we always want, and also bring your community together as a whole. So to share a little bit more about what's possible, I want to invite Diane Connery to talk about her experience in Foxborough.
Okay, thank you, Courtney. Thanks for allowing me to share what we've been working on. We have been experimenting here. That's our specialty, and your mileage may vary, but hopefully something I say will resonate. And I want to start with kind of the overview of the program I'll be talking about. Our community garden has another purpose behind it, and a lot of the decisions we have made, almost all the decisions we have made, have had a strategic purpose behind them, and that's what that we want to survive as a library long term, and for us that means that the city funds us. So we're always asking the question, what do we need to do to make sure the city funds us? And as it turns out, by working on programs that matter to the community and to city and county government, we have set ourselves up for funding that will maintain long-term viability, which is huge for us. We're really proud that our budget has gone up in a time when a lot of libraries have suffered with budget cuts. So I won't be going into a lot of details about the garden today, just kind of the overview. But I want to tell you a little bit about our town and our library. Foxborough, Texas is right on the border with Oklahoma. We're about an hour and a half north of Dallas, and Dallas is moving northwards. It's moving to us. And so the sleepy little town back in 1987, it's almost like going back in time, sometimes you feel like. And I had moved here from always living in large cities. The town population, about 2,300. Our service area is about 3,300, which includes the unincorporated area outside of our town. And there's a very small tax base with few businesses inside city limits. And the school's the largest employer, and we did get a grocery store about 2 years ago, which was huge for us. The town's on the edge of Lake Texoma, which is a really large lake known for striper fishing. And the population here is dichotomous. We have a lot of people who work in hospitality, lower paying healthcare jobs, or work for the schools, and some of those families have lived for generations in the area. The other segment of the population are retirees, weekenders who have lake homes, and retirees who move up here from the Metroplex area, from Dallas area. And a lot of them still expect the same kind of services that they had in the city. And so we're recognizing that things are changing here. So the group of volunteers started the library, and it was completely donations, some small fundraisers, plant sales, cookie sales, that kind of thing, and it was all volunteer. And that's how it was until about 7 years ago. But this group of people had decided that it was important in a small town for people to have access to books. And so they got the place up and running with donated books. It was an old 1960s post office, which, you know, that institutional green, it smelled old when you came in here. And people who really had a heart for it. But volunteers were aging out, and the money was running out. And so every board meeting, when I got involved with the library, was this depressing discussion of how many months left we had. Okay, the money can last 18 more months, 17 more months. It was this countdown to when we were going to have to close. And the library was not child-friendly, lots of rules and signs up about what you couldn't do here. There were very few young people using the library, really very few people at all using the library. And so I came in and became sort of the accidental director, and I felt like, what is worth saving here? That what I was seeing was not particularly worth saving, but it was this perfect moment in time when libraries were changing, the economy was changing, the stars aligned. We had this core group of about 4 people who came together and decided that everything we had been doing wasn't working anymore, so we needed to change, to try a new approach. So what that did was free us up. There was no fear of failure because the doors were going to close anyway. So we started experimenting with new ideas, saying yes to things, kind of living in the gray rather than saying no to everything all the time. And we knew at that time the only realistic hope of the library staying open long-term was to get taxpayer funding, to get city funding. You just can't sustain it forever on bake sales and donations. And so what we thought was we needed to make the library so important to the town, to the people, that then if we closed, people would be up in arms because the library was so important to them. We did start aggressively writing grants, and I have a fabulous board member who writes a lot of our grants. We stopped fundraisers, which is sort of counterintuitive, but we decided we wanted to start giving back to the community and not be asking for things from the community all the time. And so we started making a few changes. The city saw what was going on, and they agreed to give a budget of $4,000 a year, which was a huge increase over nothing. The next year they added an additional $5,000, and each year for several years they kept adding $5,000 until this year our total budget is $26,000, which if you're in a larger town that probably sounds kind of sad, but really for a town this size and a tax base this size, that's a huge show of commitment from the city. And it gets even better because they have committed next year to a budget of $60,000 because they want us to be open longer hours, and bigger than anything, I think they've said they're going to build us a new building that will be included in City Hall. And so that's sustainable funding. That means they're not going to let us go. And so we're super, super excited about that. And so I want to tell you just a little bit about our process that we've gone through. We went to training for Harwood Institute back in 2015, held a series of community conversations. We also went to the annual town event and did one-on-one interviews there, talked to people one-on-one in the library to find out what mattered to the people about the town they lived in. And there were a couple of threads that emerged, and it was so interesting no matter what demographic were in these small community conversations people were telling us the same thing. They wanted to get to know their neighbors, was a big part of what they wanted, because they're little social circles here, and sometimes people didn't know anyone outside of their circle. So they said that, and then as we got started, people were talking about wanting to be important or involved in something bigger than themselves. They wanted to feel like they could make a difference in the community that they love so much and do something that mattered. So about at the same time, the city received a grant to build a new park in town. I think it was $1 million grant, and they had to do a significant amount of work on their part to get it ready. And in a small town, that literally means the city manager is out there with a shovel, you know, digging ditches and doing what needs to be done. And so they put a lot of city time, money, effort into this park, and then no one was using it. And so they started taking a lot of heat from citizens on why have you built this park and nobody's using it. And so going back to our strategic thinking, we wanted to prove to the city that we would be good partners for them and back them up. So the community garden fits that bill of we'll put it in the public park and draw people to the park. So the city, you know, we've got your back on this. So through a Texas State Library grant, we received almost $50,000 to start the community garden. It was a health literacy program. A significant coup with that, I can't say it was on purpose, but I'm so glad it happened, is we hired a young mom to run it, and she's actually just had her 7th child. She is really well connected in the community with a totally different network of people than we had seen in the library. She calls herself a crunchy mom. She's involved with working with the homeless in the area and a lot of sort of sustainable, natural living. She brought in new users to the community garden, actually from across the state line, from in Oklahoma, but towns in Texas 20 and 30 miles away are coming to Foxborough to attend our programming. And so I think hiring that key influencer was the best move we've made with this project. So in this slide you're looking at first Busy Bee. We have monthly Busy Bees where people who have individual beds help the communal beds and projects within the garden itself. We've got some charity beds and some demonstration beds. And what you see here is a lot of Austin College students. Austin College is a nearby liberal arts college, and the students have been excited about being involved with this because feeding the homeless is something that they really value and that speaks to them. And we've also gotten a significant amount of local news coverage because what we're doing is different. It doesn't hurt that Robin, the garden manager, is bubbly and outgoing. She's the face of the program to the community. I'm not a gardener. I like to stand back and watch what's going on and facilitate the progress we're making. And people, we have found, want to be part of something successful. They want to be part of something that's new and exciting. And the other piece of it is success breeds success. So we started with one large grant, and that has led to some other sort of medium-sized grants. In a small town, one of the things I love about it is that individuals make a difference. And so what we've got so much going on around the garden that people get to pick what interests them and work towards that. So just to give you a little idea of some of the things we have going on, lots of gardening classes, cooking classes, that sort of thing. We have attracted drumming circles that go out there at night under the stars. So much has been due to us being able to be light on our feet, which I think is, in a small town, probably easier than in a larger place. We don't have a lot of bureaucracy. If we have an idea, like, hey, why don't we do this? Okay, let's do it this afternoon. So we've had that freedom, which I recognize that will go away as we get more funding from the city. But what we've seen is it's just so important to build community, to build partnerships. Just saying yes to things when people contact us, making these connections that we never foresaw when we started. But just because we're able to be light on our feet, it's opened up a lot of possibilities, exciting things, and we're always on to bigger and better. So I think seeing part of our success has led the city to the first strategic planning the city has done in its history. And the city contracted with Council of Governments to facilitate it, and I was asked to be on the steering committee. There are 10 people on the steering committee, and really what we're doing now is guiding the direction of where the city is to go as it grows. We want to plan for structured growth, and what emerged from our meetings is the primary resource we have in our town is nature, close to wildlife refuge in the lake. We also have water rights in our lake that people want to buy. And so that's where our next big grant is going, is on that kind of thing. But part of the process of the strategic planning was market segmentation, which I had not been familiar with this. When retailers are looking to come to a town, they're putting big bucks into making sure they're locating in the right place. And so as it turns out, our population here fell into two categories, and we get within this some socioeconomic traits that are specific to our area, which as a library doing programming, I think these are great jumping off places. For instance, as Salt of the Earth segment, the people in the segments like spending time with their families, and they try to eat healthy, tracking nutrition and ingredients and foods they purchase. And the Great Outdoors segment, residents are very DIY-oriented, cost-conscious, and they do a lot of their own yard work, home improvement, that kind of thing. So that is informing future programs that we have. And so just kind of as I'm wrapping it up and where we're headed, again, we're looking at, yes, what is in all of this for the community and what is in it specifically for the city. We want this to matter to them. And so, again, taking advantage of Austin College being nearby, they have access to grants that we don't have access to. They put a high priority in being involved with the community, and so are very anxious to build this relationship with us and prove themselves as important to the community as well. This example is talking about if we plant native plants and restore prairie, what will the cost savings be for individuals who live in the town, but the city as well. So if the city saves money, maybe they'll spend it on us, the library. That's what I'm hoping for. We've just been amazed at the changes in the library, how it's helping to transform the community. And we were struggling. We were getting ready to close the doors, but by finding out what matters to the community, by just asking questions and then looking to see what they actually showed up for, because, you know, sometimes they say they're interested in something, but they don't show up, and then aligning our actions with the priorities of the city, we're thriving. We need a bigger space, and the city has said they'll provide it. So that's just a little taste of what we've been working on, and always saying like 98% of the time it's so much fun. Once in a while it's not, but I love that in a small library the library gets to be a big part of the direction of where the city is going. And so, Courtney, I'll give it back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Diane. And I hope folks know, too, that Diane will be doing a webinar where she can share a lot more about the work that they've done in Foxborough. I believe we can share the link for that in the chat in just a moment here. But so there's a chance to learn much more from her. I think it's a great example of what's possible when libraries engage their communities. All right, so as you've heard already, community engagement can take on many different forms, such as the different approaches that we've heard from you all just a little while ago, to the larger community projects like Diane's that we just heard about in Foxborough. What we're highlighting today is how dialogue and deliberation can be utilized by the library to bring people together, to learn from one another, make decisions, and more. And so we want to explain a little bit more about what we mean by dialogue and deliberation, and so I'll invite Sandy to talk a bit about that.
Hi, everybody, and thank you. And I want to thank Diane for sharing her story. That was very inspiring. It's a great story. Now, we love this chart because although not everyone has heard of dialogue or deliberation and knows what they are necessarily, everyone does know or seems to know what debate is. So this is a great little chart to look at to understand what these processes mean. But in short, dialogue is an exchange of ideas or opinions where participants come together in person to share information and perspectives with a goal of seeking greater understanding of a topic or of one another, and sometimes but not always a decision or action. So imagine a group of people coming together to discuss recent events like the election or a topic like education, without a decision to be made necessarily, but with the goal of hearing others' perspectives and learning from one another. And that's what we mean by dialogue. It's about building understanding. So deliberation, like dialogue, is also about an exchange of ideas, but it goes a step further in seeking to make choices. So at the heart of deliberation is weighing possible actions and decisions carefully by examining their benefits, costs, and consequences in light of what is most valuable to each of us. So imagine the public coming together to make a decision that impacts their community, whether it be how best to address increasing congestion and public transit needs, or maybe to decide how to address issues of homelessness or something like that that's of great concern in the community. They also come together in deliberation to identify the needs that exist, as well as identify and evaluate the potential outcomes for addressing the issue at hand. So they might ask questions like, can we afford to expand the services available to the homeless? Which services, and what might we have to give up or reprioritize in order to make this happen? So deliberation provides a process for examining options and making decisions as a group. So back to you, Courtney.
Thanks, Sandy. And I just wanted to note that there is there's a comment in the chat about this slide in particular. It's a really great chart, isn't it? And I just put a note in there, but wanted to highlight that a copy of the slides will be available after today's webinar, along with today's recording and some additional resources. So you can get your hands on this chart after today's webinar. All right. So why are dialogue and deliberation useful tools for the library? I wanted to share this quote with you from Jen Wilding of Consensus, which is a nonprofit based in Kansas City who does a lot of work with libraries, and she shared her thoughts with NCDD when we were talking about this with our network. She mentioned, I would recommend that a library use dialogue and deliberation. It seems really useful for two situations. One, giving people the chance to talk about challenging national issues like the war in Iraq, and two, allowing people to discuss local issues or the local face of a national issue. It's the kind of event that local residents expect from the library in that it isn't advocacy, but rather it's an opportunity to learn and think through an issue. So dialogue and deliberation motivate participants to stay more informed on issues of public concern and also make people feel more connected to their community. They also help people feel more connected to those whose views and experiences are very different from their own, which, as we all know in our current society, is something that can be a challenge sometimes. They are also a natural addition to your current programming. So if you think about it, if you run a program that introduces community members to an issue or information on an important topic, imagine adding that dialogue or deliberation component. So getting people in the room to talk about the topic with one another, not just listening to a speaker or asking questions of a panel. These types of methods can be a great addition to this current programming without requiring a lot more work. If you're bringing people into the library already for the programs that already exist, why not encourage them to have a dialogue with one another? They can complement speakers or book clubs, certainly, and they can be utilized to help your community really dig deeper into the important issues that need to be discussed and really tackled together. So why should you, as public libraries, engage your communities? I'd certainly love to hear your thoughts, so please go ahead and feel free to share your thoughts about why public libraries should engage their communities in the chat. And I can certainly share some of my thoughts, our thoughts rather, with you in the meantime as well. From our view, you provide essential services and programming for people in a variety of ways, and you're well positioned in your communities to do so. And thanks, Becky, for chiming in. Your library is a trusted place. Yeah, definitely. You're also an institution for learning, so what better space for encouraging us to learn from one another, right? Information literacy, of course, is a big part of library programming, and these engagement models work hand in hand with those information literacy goals. So we need to learn how to take in and process information in our learning as well as in our engagement. Similarly, we also need to engage with one another in our communities in order to be participants in civic life. So through modeling good engagement, you're furthering both the information and the civic literacy of your community members, which I think is just fabulous. I see lots of you chiming in now, which is fabulous, really great. You're talking about libraries being a neutral or trusted space or the center of the community, absolutely. You're talking about the library belonging to the community. It's great. And I just saw one comment I wanted to highlight because I really liked how you put it. And I think that was Marcos here. Library is a neutral space for many from different backgrounds to come together and share information. Libraries are about people and information sharing. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's great. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. And I think you've actually highlighted some of the other thoughts that I wanted to share with you that come from some of your fellow librarians, like this quote here, who's from Richard Frieder, a former librarian at the Hartford Public Library in Connecticut. Richard had shared with us previously this quote, which is, libraries have an enormous asset, which is trust. People trust libraries and public libraries in particular. And that means that they feel comfortable coming to the library and sharing their ideas and concerns and working together with us to help solve problems. And I heard several of you touch upon that as well here. And if you want to hear more about what they did in Hartford, Samantha just shared with you all a link to the case study that tells you more about what they've been able to do in their community. But what you've been touching on, and I think is really great, is that for many people, the library is viewed as a safe or welcoming space, more so than many other spaces in our communities today. And you're certainly convenient to people who live in your communities too, of course. People trust their libraries, and thus you have a powerful space to utilize for engagement. Engaging your communities through dialogue and deliberation also offer you the opportunity to welcome in or include those who may not feel as welcomed into the library. Because dialogue and deliberation value our individual experiences, our values, and our contributions, they provide you with new opportunities to engage the community members who may not be coming to the library and really welcome them into the conversation too. I also recently spoke with Erica Freudenberger, who's the former director of the Red Hook Library in New York and is now working with the Adirondack Library System, I believe. And there's also a case study of the work that they've done in Red Hook, which we'll share in the chat now, that you can take a look at to see what they've done. But she shared her thoughts with me about why libraries are suited for this work. And what she said was, we are uniquely positioned to do this work in small and rural libraries. Because we are small, we are a lot more nimble and flexible than others. The biggest challenge is building capacity. A lot of library directors are part-time or there is no other staff, so we have to pull in people from the community to do this work. Now, while her comments are specific to smaller libraries, her point about community partners is certainly applicable to any size library. You, as libraries exploring new methods of engagement, have the opportunity to make further inroads and create partnerships with other members of your broader community through your dialogue work. It can be as simple as inviting these entities into the library for dialogue or working with them to organize an event. In some cases, having community partners working with you on these initiatives will really be essential to making it happen. And of course, keep in mind that you shouldn't feel like you always have to take all of this on by yourselves, because there's lots of other folks in the community who also want to be able to tackle these problems, and they'll be natural partners for you to work with. Certainly, what we saw in Diane's example is a great, another great situation where several community partners really became a part of it, this effort, and really helped to make it really successful. All right, so let's talk about how to make this happen. There are several elements that help increase the likelihood of success of any dialogue initiative that you want to pursue. And they are setting goals and picking a timely topic, setting some ground rules for how you'll engage with one another, and picking a process for how you'll talk with one another, and identifying a facilitator. And we're going to talk about all of these a little bit further. But a note about facilitators. Through the Models for Change initiative, you will be exposed to different models for dialogue and deliberation, and you're going to learn skills for facilitation as well as organizing these conversations. You may feel more prepared to facilitate some conversations than others after having participated. Please remember that NCDD and our network of members are out there, and we would love to support you further as you go out and do this work. So certainly there's lots of resources that we've shared on the LTC site where you can find some more information. And of course, remember that our map of members is also there for you to help find people that are close to you that you can reach out to, and would be happy to connect with you, no doubt. All right, so I'm gonna let Sandy talk a little bit more about goals.
Yep, great. I love this this chart. It's based on our board chair, Martine Karkazin, wrote a great article on the goals of dialogue and deliberation a few years back for Public Agenda. And I turned this into a fun little chart because I thought it was quite a useful construct for us to use. So, I mean, basically, the goals of your engagement efforts can vary, and all of your goals are valid. But from what we've heard from you in the pre-webinar survey, many of you are already working on the first order goals on a regular basis. You're learning about what your community needs from you. You are improving your relationships, people's relationships in the community, and you're bringing education, access to information, transferring civic literacy skills, and more to your community members already. And I always argue that no matter what kind of dialogue or deliberation effort you run, you're going to end up with those first order goals, because people often do feel a little bit more responsible as a citizen. They do feel like they have improved relationships in their community, and they do learn about issues. So the models you'll be learning about in this series will help you to reach the second and ultimately the third order goals that are outlined here. The models you'll learn about will provide you with ways to bring people together across differences, to transform conflict situations, and to make decisions about what matters to your community. And through participating in these engagement opportunities, you'll be helping to build the community's skills to solve problems, to work collaboratively, and ultimately to increase the civic agency of your community members and to improve your community's ability to solve problems overall. So back to you, Courtney, to talk about the engagement stream.
Great, thanks, Sandy. So like the goals that Sandy outlined, you'll also need to know what kind of process will best serve your goals. And so the engagement streams framework, which we see here on your screen, which was developed by NCDD and our members, and there's a link to learn some more information about that in the chat now, categorizes dialogue and deliberation approaches into 4 streams based on the primary intention or purpose, and shows which of the most well-known methods have really proven themselves effective in each of those streams. So it's a great tool for navigating the many different models that are out there and determining what might be best for what you'd like to do in your community. So I just want to talk briefly about each of these, and then we'll go back to our poll results and talk a bit about that. But the first here you can see in your top left is exploration. So the exploration stream is really about encouraging community members to learn more about themselves, their community, or an issue. This can be really helpful when a community needs to reflect and gain collective insights or make new connections to one another, but not necessarily making any kind of decision about something that needs to be done. So Conversation Cafe, which is one of the methods that you'll learn about in this webinar series, falls into this exploration stream. So think about picking a topic that allows for exploration of the issue or participant perspective, like a question under the broad topic of immigration, for instance. You could ask your community, what does it mean to be an inclusive community? Or what do we want the immigrant experience to look like in our community? These questions don't necessarily require a decision, but they generate dialogue and idea generation. It's also a great model to use, or models within this stream are great to use for asking the community to think about and generate ideas for your community. So like posing the question, what would we like our community to look like in 20 years? Great model to explore some of those questions, and great to get at asking the community what's important to them, what they'd like to do, what they'd like to see, and so on. The next stream is conflict transformation. Conflict transformation processes create safe spaces for resolving conflicts, building trust, and improving relations in a community. They can be used when healing is needed after a crisis or a trauma. Dialogue about political polarization or race relations fit really well in this stream. They're conversations that require that safe space where people with different perspectives or people who have been in conflict with one another can build trust, which can take some time, and those models really allow for that. And then we move on to our decision-making stream at the bottom left there. These approaches are used to involve a community in influencing or making decisions about policy or about other issues. They're really about deliberating, so examining those options, weighing the costs and consequences, and coming to a decision or a direction for the community or our governing body to implement. So these methods are good for topics like transportation or education, public budgeting, where a decision needs to come from a real close examination of the options available. And then finally, collaborative action is really about empowering communities to solve problems and take collective responsibility for action. These are good models to use when multiple entities or stakeholders are involved or need to be a part of the solution. And Future Search, which is one of our models in this series, falls within this collaborative action stream. This approach really brings communities together to determine how to solve problems and work together on solutions that all of us will have a role to play in. All right, so if we can go back to the poll and take a look at what you had to say earlier. As you may have noticed, the 4 options that we had posed earlier to you correspond to these engagement streams. All right, and as we can see, most of you, 51%, indicated a need for exploration. That's great. That means that looking at the Conversation Cafe model might be really, really helpful to you as you proceed. And the next one is collaborative action, with 32% of you responding that that is what your community most needs right now, which is also great because we'll be talking more about how to do that through the Future Search model. And so we've got some of you too also mentioning conflict transformation and decision making, smaller number, but still noteworthy. I want to mention that we're only covering 2 streams in this series, but we have covered all 4 of the streams throughout the entire Models for Change project. So, I encourage you, if you really do feel like conflict transformation and decision-making are particularly useful for your communities, to go back to some of those webinars and take a look at things. Specifically, conflict transformation, the webinar we had on reflective structured dialogue with essential partners would be particularly useful to you. And folks who are interested in decision making, certainly collaborative action also has a lot to offer you in that regard, but you may want to go back and take a look at our National Issues Forums webinar in particular, or going back to our initial series for the large and urban public libraries, which also offered everyday democracies approach, which kind of falls in the collaborative action, but touches on decision making as well. Okay, so we've talked about goals and intent, and so, the third element to that, if we're looking at our list, is picking a topic. And so, you need to think about this and, choose a topic that's going to be of importance to your community. So certainly I'm curious, and if you'd like to share with us in the chat, I would welcome you to share with us a topic that you feel needs to be discussed in your community now. So if you have something that really is calling for conversation, please feel free to share that with us in the chat now, and we can just see what is really coming up for you all. I know in our past webinars, we've heard about a whole bunch of topics. Politics and the 2016 election certainly came up a lot, particularly in our first webinar series, which happened not too long after that election. We've heard about immigration, education, climate change. I see the opioid crisis has popped up in our chat several times, and certainly that's something that we've been hearing a lot more about lately as a need for conversation, both with libraries and also our network has been talking about that a lot too. I see race relations coming up, economic mobility, after-school opportunities for youth. This is great. Unemployment and retraining options. Second Amendment, certainly that's something that I think a lot of us have a desire or need to talk about in our communities right now. as well as, our nation as a whole. Excellent. Thank you all for sharing these topics. I just want to highlight that whether you're looking to bring people together to hear different perspectives and viewpoints on some of these issues, or whether your community really needs to come together and make a decision for how you're going to address a topic like homelessness, like education, these dialogue and deliberation methods can help you to achieve these goals. And thank you again for continuing to share. I'm looking forward to digging deeper into all of these because I can't quite keep up with you. There's so many great responses that you're sharing with us. But just to highlight the importance of thinking about your topic, I wanted to share this quote which came from Carolyn Kaywood, a retired librarian from Virginia Beach, who had a focus on civic engagement. She's also a longtime NCDD member. And she had spoke with us when we were talking a bit about the importance of this work in libraries. And what she said was, if the library thinks the community should care about an issue but has not asked what the community thinks, it may be a waste of resources. Library staff planned a program series around food issues, safety, sustainability, and costs, and wanted a civic engagement component. My partner and I put a lot of effort into developing a conversation framework, and then no one came. Since then, we polled the public on the topics they want to discuss, and we've had much better results. So just a highlight again to do some research, and ask your community where they are in relation to the topics at hand, or just, asking them frankly what topics they think are most important to talk about right now. It's also a great, as you're thinking about your topic, think too about community groups who are already trying to address this issue, people who perhaps are working in this area. Think about, is anyone else trying to organize conversations around this? Are there community groups or leaders who have supported conversations? These are the partners that you should be looking for, and people to help you to bring people into the room. I saw Lisa just commented that it does seem like the same people show up to every conversation. I know that's something that certainly can happen, and I've heard that from folks before. A big part of trying to ensure that you can bring in diverse voices, new voices to your conversations is really looking to community partners and being very intentional about working with them to bring in community members who have not participated in the past or perhaps can offer a different perspective on some of these topics of importance. All right, so we've talked about our goals and our topics. Now we're going to talk a little bit about ground rules. I'm going to hand things back over to Sandy.
Yeah, thank you, Courtney. So choosing a topic or issue was the first element for good dialogue. The second one is having ground rules in place. I'm sure many of you are familiar with ground rules. If not all of you, they're also called agreements or norms. They're basically how you set the stage for respectful, thoughtful conversation. And this example here is from Conversation Cafe, which is one of the models you'll be introduced to in this series. And I just love them because it's so simple. Open-mindedness, acceptance, curiosity, discovery, sincerity. My favorite one is brevity. Go for honesty and depth, but don't go on and on. Isn't that so key to good dialogue? But I love those, and we'll tell you more about Conversation Cafe in a little bit. But the third element for success or for good dialogue is, and we'll go to the next slide here, but it's picking a process and simply choose a process to use for your engagement efforts that's based on your goals. It's also based on the topic and the resources that you have on hand. You might not be able to have an expensive process based on your resources, so resources are key here. And so once you have a sense of what you'd like to do and what your community wants to talk about, you just need to pick your process together. And in this series, we're introducing you to 2 different models that can help you engage your community. I wanted to introduce you to Future Search just briefly, which is one of the 2 methods we'll be doing in this series. And it's a great method that's used by many communities and organizations. It's kind of a unique planning method that enables large, diverse groups of people to validate a common mission, to take responsibility for action, and to develop commitment to implementation. It's in a way, it's a strategic planning method. So in this case, the meeting is very task-focused. It brings together people from all walks of life into the same conversation, those who might have resources, those that have different kinds of expertise, those that have formal authority and different kinds of needs. You make sure that everyone in your community in one way or another is represented by who's taking part of this process. So people tell stories about their past in the community, their present, and their desired future. And through dialogue, they discover their common ground, and then they make concrete action plans. So this meeting design comes from theories and principles tested in many cultures for the past 50 years. It relies on mutual learning among stakeholders as a catalyst for voluntary action and follow-up. And people devise new forms of cooperation that can continue for months or years. So you use Future Search when you find yourself in kind of an uncertain, fast-changing situations that you feel it's important for everybody to have the same large picture, the same bigger picture in order to act responsibly. And the kinds of topics, I mean, lots of topics are relevant for the Future Search model, but things like housing, employment, transportation, education, planning kind of a vision for your community, that's all suitable for this model. And like I said, this is a method for strategic planning, which helps communities to develop cooperative plans. And libraries could serve as a facilitative leader for conversations in the community where plans need to be developed, as libraries are a key resource and gathering place, as we all know. So Future Search can be used in a community as well as by libraries internally. And I'll let Courtney give you an example of how Future Search was used in some libraries in Nebraska.
Sure. Thanks, Sandy. So Future Search was actually used by the Nebraska Libraries system about 10 years ago to really bring a fresh perspective to Nebraska Libraries' service needs and help to foster direction, partnerships, and collaboration amongst libraries. So they brought librarians from across the state together in a 2-day meeting, and they set some goals for what they wanted to do. Their aims were to develop a shared vision for library and information services in the state of Nebraska, design a blueprint for seamless, customer-centered, lifelong access to library and information service. They wanted to engage libraries from all types and sizes of libraries to unite and to speak with one voice. And they wanted to foster collaboration amongst library and information professional organizations, library advocates, and library resources in order to improve services for Nebraskans. So they met over those 2 days to discuss, to brainstorm ideas, identify approaches they could take to achieving these goals, and ultimately make some decisions for how libraries across the state could work individually and also together. From that, a task force was formed as a follow-up to the conference to help work on some of those statewide efforts. And librarians across the state left the meeting with their own next steps for how to address these needs that have been identified and to achieve the goals that they had set out to achieve. So Samantha has shared a link with you in the chat, which will actually bring you to a wiki for this process that gives you lots of information on the process that they had, their notes, results, and so on. So if you want to really kind of dig into what happened there, you can take a look at that. And so that gives you an example of, what's possible with future search on a larger scale. Certainly, it can also be done within a library on a smaller scale, just internally amongst your staff or your staff and some community members too. So keep that in mind. All right, and so Sandy's going to introduce you to Conversation Cafe. Sandy may be muted.
All right. Sorry about that. I was talking away. So let me tell you a little bit about conversation cafes. It's a great, simple, kind of elegantly simple method. They're basically open hosted conversations that happen in public spaces, usually like cafes, as well as conferences, classrooms, libraries, basically anywhere people gather to make sense of our world. And at Conversation Cafe, there's nothing to join. People get no homework. There's no real agenda. It's a simple process that helps us shift. And this is Conversation Cafe language that I love. Helps us shift from big talk to from small talk to big talk, to have conversations that matter. So they're 90-minute hosted conversations held in a public setting where anyone is welcome to join. It's a simple format that helps people feel at ease and gives everyone who wants it a chance to speak. It's also fine for people to simply listen, of course. But one of the things I love about Conversation Cafe is their little wallets, basically business card size table tents that on the front, it's just the Conversation Cafe logo. In the inside, you get a simple process. You basically go around the circle. Everyone introduces themselves. You go around one more time. You say a little bit about the topic and why you're interested in it and how it involves you. Maybe share some stories. You go around the circle one more time, and then there's some open discussion, and then you have a closing round. It's that simple, and the ground rules that you just saw are also on that nice little card. So really, almost anybody can host a Conversation Cafe. It helps to have a little bit of host training and, of course, to look over some materials, which they have lots of them on the Conversation Cafe site. But you basically use Conversation Cafe when you want participants to learn more about themselves, their community, or an issue, or to discover innovative solutions to problems. And topics suited for the model, pretty much anything, but it's particularly suited for topics that you want to explore, not necessarily make a community or a group decision about. So you might want to talk about your community, you might want to talk about death even, or love, or current events. It's great for helping people to just process events or issues like instances of violence, or whether it's national or community-based, or other crises that are happening that people just need to talk about. And why we chose this model, it's an open source, simple method, free for anyone to use, which allows for it to be adapted to whatever issue or topic is timely or desired. And with training, libraries can run this kind of dialogue using very minimal resources, which makes it particularly ideal in a lot of instances. So Courtney has an example to share about Conversation Cafe's use in libraries.
Yeah, so Conversation Cafe has already been used in a handful of libraries across the country, one of which is the Great Neck Public Library in New York. They've been doing a series of Conversation Cafes with a cafe host, Ron Gross, who's been a longtime Conversation Cafe host. And so they host regular conversations. They actually have an event coming up on March 2nd, as I was looking back to see what they're up to lately. And they're talking in that session about trust. And so the description, kind of outlines some of the questions they want to explore. So it says, how trusting are you in general? Where does our capacity to trust come from? How does trust help us make life predictable, create a sense of community, and facilitate social and economic relationships? What has happened to our trust in our institutions and public figures, in our newspapers, magazines, and on TV? When trust is lost, can it be regained, and if so, how? And Samantha just shared with you a link where you can actually see the listing, because it goes on a little bit more beyond that. But essentially, you know, it says that they're welcoming people in to share their experiences, knowledge, and wisdom about topics that matter. Everyone speaks and everyone listens because all of us are wiser than any of us. And so, you know, this just gives you an example of how wonderfully simple it is to organize a conversation cafe, select your question or a set of questions, invite people in to share their thoughts on those questions and talk with one another about it. And it can also be a great tool to really explore more and learn more from your community about what is important to them, what issues they're currently dealing with, and things like that too. So keep that in mind. So hopefully we have wet your whistle a little bit and gotten you interested in these models that you'll be learning more about in the subsequent webinars. But in the meantime, we just want to point you to a couple of resources that you can dig into if you're interested, and those are posted up here on the slide. NCDD's Resource Center, which Sandy mentioned earlier on, and thank you, Samantha, for adding links to all of the above in the chat right now, so you can access those. Our Resource Center has over 3,100 resources, a whole bunch of different kinds, both issue guides on different topics, publications, books, you know, it gives you more information on many different models that are out there and so on. Most important, though, is our beginner's guide, and that would be my recommendation for the first place to start because it has all of the most essential information as you start to explore how to utilize dialogue and deliberation. Please also, you know, do check out the LTC site. We have a whole bunch of resources that are organized by these different models, as well as some general resources that we think would be useful to you as libraries as you get started. Those are all up on that site. And don't forget the LTC listserv, which is also another great place to connect with folks who are doing this work. So we are now going to move over to some Q&A. I know we only have about 9 minutes left or so, but we'll try to answer a couple of questions that have come up. And if you have something else that you haven't asked, now would be a time to share that with us in the chat.
So in the meantime, while you're sharing your questions, I'm going to just toss to Sandy and Diane and Courtney the questions we've sort of been keeping track of. One is, I think, was answered in the chat, how we're defining mid-sized libraries. And I'll just take this one. In planning for this initiative, we went with the IMLS categories, but what we really hope you will all do is just go with whatever models or whatever characterization of your library or the community you serve speaks to you. So, you know, there's a lot of overlapping categories when it comes to libraries and the communities they serve, where this is really meant to be an open opportunity for learning and not restrictive to library type or size. Diane, someone wants to know how you decided on a community garden.
Yes, yeah. The short answer is low-income housing is near the park where the garden is, and we observed a number of our library patrons who didn't have transportation, and particularly one family with little kids told us that they had to do all of their grocery shopping at the dollar store because they couldn't get to a grocery store. And the thought of those little kids eating everything, I mean, there's no produce, fresh produce in the dollar store. So that was an initial spark.
Fantastic. And I know we posted the link to your, the more in-depth webinar about your work, and I'm sure there'll be more discussion of that coming up. Another question was really about, I think is more about getting people to the table, what different groups who have stakes in issues may not view forums as friendly or safe. really targeting participation to ensure diversity. I don't know, Courtney and Sandy or Diane, if you have any sort of quick places to point our questioner to in terms of being able to navigate those situations.
Sure. Go ahead, Diane.
My first thought was just that idea of a key influencer, finding one person who could then reach out to their network has been successful for us.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that was exactly what I was going to say, Diane. So you've echoed it. I think that's where finding your community partners, folks who have are well regarded in different segments of the community, who can really speak to the value of participating and get people into the conversation. Those are the most valuable ways to really ensure diversity and welcome people in who may be skeptical.
Mm-hmm.
There's another question that was posted just about shifting the dialogue, dealing with vocal citizens who, don't necessarily value the library's work, and how to, really shift that dialogue a bit.
Mm-hmm. I'd be curious to hear Diane's thoughts, but certainly I think what I've heard from some other librarians in the way that some of that has been able to shift for some of those people has been the library really asking people about what's important to them, what's important to them for their community, not just, what do you want to see at the library. But when you're asking people about what they value, what they'd like to see happen, what they envision for their community, it's a great way to really open people up to talking with you, and ultimately seeing the library as a partner in really achieving some of these goals that everyone wants to better their community, or at least most everyone. And so I think that's a helpful first step, and also a great way to reach folks who might not be your regular library patrons.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
And this is Mary. I just add to that, this is a scenario that we hear a lot, and this is all of this work, all this dialogue and deliberation work is really long-term work and difficult work. So I think that all of the resources, we've been sending all these links today, and if you go to the resource webpage and those, the links that you see there, they're really designed to help this work, but we are also relying on you all to continue to share your experiences with this and your peers to, throughout the field to really see what works. That's a lot of what we're trying to do here by sort of pushing all these models out and trying to figure out what works best in the library context. And I know there's one, I think, last question, and I see that Stephen is trying to see if Heather has a question too. Oh, and I love that Ryan has put up a book reference. Yes. For shifting dialogue. But the other question really is about, I think, facilitating conversations that are not going well and when participants aren't following guidelines. So I'm going to toss that to you all.
Yeah, I'll take that one. This is Sandy, and I would say that that's why it's important to have a facilitator present who knows how to keep guidelines in check, knows kind of the polite way to say, hey, you're taking up too much space in the conversation, or we haven't heard from you yet, or we've, let's hear another perspective. They know, facilitators, and probably a bunch of you are trained facilitators as well, but they have lots of nice tricks to shift conversations like that are not going well, and that's what the ground rules and the facilitators are there for. And you'll hear more about that in both the Future Search and the Conversation Cafe webinars, and you can also search the NCDD Resource Center for other resources on that and lots of tips and tricks there.
And so thank you. This is Mary again, and again, I'd say really start digging into Libraries Transforming Communities resources, and you will find a lot there and a lot in the previous webinars that sort of address many of these questions. We are really running out of time, so I just want to go through some very essential pieces of information about this learning stream. This learning stream has an opportunity that hasn't been available in the other ones. We are ending this learning stream, as we did with the other ones, with an in-person workshop that is a pre-conference at ALA annual conference. Thanks to IMLS funding, there is an opportunity for small and rural library workers to apply for an $800 travel stipend to defray travel costs to that in-person workshop. The deadline for applying is March 9th. We have 25 stipends, travel stipends available. We will notify recipients of this by March 26th. This is how it'll work. Those who applied and aren't selected to receive the travel stipends will be added to the list of potential participants for the workshop itself, which is a free workshop. We're going to notify those who've applied to participate in the workshop without travel support, and those who didn't get it, who are all on that list, of their status in early April. We'll put all these dates on our website. And those who have not been selected will be automatically placed on a waiting list in case of cancellation. There are 50 workshop seats total. In terms of how we're defining small and rural, again, we will put that up. They're going by the IMLS definition of those categories. In order to retain a seat in the workshop, and also because it's cool, when you finish these learning sessions, go to Credly, claim your badge that you have completed this. Claiming these digital badges is optional. Unless you want to participate in the in-person training session, then it is completely required for participation. The instructions are up here. You simply set up a Credly account, log in, click on Claim Credit, enter this. Right now, you can enter and receive your badge just for this webinar. If you're participating in the workshop and you don't collect your badge by June 1st, your name will be removed from the participant list, and a librarian from the waiting list will be offered your spot in order of their submission date to participate in the workshop. So please, please take advantage of these opportunities, and will viewing the recording count as a chance to get the travel? Absolutely. We're recording all of these. We understand not everybody can be here live. This is for the entire series. So please, we simply want you to be able to have the opportunity to experience these sessions and the related resources, okay? Please complete the post-webinar survey. We need your feedback on this so that we can learn from your experience and improve this and keep getting funding to support all of this important work that you are taking on. And with that, I'm going to thank you all for your excellent questions, for being with us today. Thank you so much to our presenters, Diane Connery, Courtney Breeze, and Sandy Harbacher. Our thanks also to the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation, IMLS, the Public Library Association, and our Models for Change Advisory Group for their guidance, as well as my colleagues behind the scenes, Stephen Hoffman, Samantha Oakley, Brian Russell, and Sarah Osman. All of you for your support of this webinar and the LTC Models for Change initiative. And again, this learning webinar has been a part of ALA's Libraries Transforming Communities initiative, which addresses a critical need within the library field by developing and distributing tools and resources to support the work of engaging communities in innovative ways. Thank you all. And Amy, you'll get a link to the slides and a follow-up email immediately after you log off. Thanks all.